What's up, everybody? It's Wednesday night, and we are here with another episode of Coin A Geek, and it is me, your host, Elliot Hillis. I am joined today by a very special guest, somebody who I've known for a long time, dating back to 2004, friend, and now he gets to guest on my show after me guesting on his show for many, many years. We're going to talk about that today. He is the creator of Video Game News Radio, one of the very first, if not the first, video game podcast that you could get on iTunes. He is the one and the only Mr. Kevin J. Baird. What's going on,
Kevin? Hey, to be on your show after, 20 years or something that we've been doing this. But yes, hello, everyone.
Well, hello, this is Kevin, and this is his face. And I remember when we first, your face was a mystery back in the day, both you and your brothers. And this was pre-Facebook that, if you can remember those days.
Yeah, you never know when something's going to happen. Like, people be like, I can't, this is the worst thing. What you said about Australians is awful. And, and then we'd be in the news and everything. So it was better to hide your face at first with that show. But yeah.
That's right. Yeah. It was kind of like a quest for us to be like, oh, let's see if we could find him on Facebook. And there was some picture of your brother, Brian, that was just like this tiny little like square, and it was just like him with like in like a dark mask on or something like that. And so it was good stuff. Well, so there's a lot of people that probably aren't familiar necessarily, at least in my audience, except for the few that know me through VGN. But I want to sort of talk to you a little bit about what VGN was, your history with games. But before we even get into the podcast part of it, you're older than me. I won't say how much older, unless you want to say yourself.
I'm almost 50. I'm 49.
You're 49. Okay, I'm 38. So we got an 11-year difference. Welcome, Super Sleuth. That's my buddy Andrew, by the way. But so we grew up in slightly different generations. You're like a product, I would say, of the 80s. I was a kid during the 80s. So, sure. But you kind of got to see the entire real evolution of modern video games, which is partially why I'm interested in having you on the show. Yeah, because you've seen it go through its genesis
and been obsessed with it.
Right. So just you as an individual, apart from anything that you've done with any of the shows that we'll get to, what's your first kind of memory of gaming, and talk a little bit about what got you into it in the first place?
Well, I was born in 1972, and it's actually the first home game console was the Odyssey.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like Odyssey 1, it was just called Odyssey. It was a Pong system, but it actually took cartridges, but they weren't actually, there was no, like the whole thing didn't even use microchips back then. They used some sort of circuit board. It was like with jumpers or something that would change diodes around or something. I'm not an electronics guy, so I don't know. But, it was pretty revolutionary at the time. People didn't know what to do with it, and they didn't know how to make it or anything. They gave you like plastic things that you would lay over the TV screen, and then, they would give you like poker chips and dice, and they were trying to make games out of it and stuff. And that was like the first time like somebody did, but it had Pong,
Yeah.
So people were like, hey, it's got Pong, we like Pong. And Pong became like a thing from like 72 to right about like 1979, 1980, when like maybe the first 8-bit, like, Atari 2600 type stuff started to come out. And my family, we lived in Michigan at the time, and we got an Odyssey, but not an Odyssey 1. I don't know what it was because I was like 5. I wasn't like, Father, is this Odyssey 4 or 5? You know what I mean? Like, I had no idea that there was even such a thing, but it didn't work, right? So it was just a Pong system, and like, it was on the TV, but like the left side didn't work and the right side did, and there was something weird about it too. Like we had like Star Trek walkie-talkies, and like if we pulled the thing to talk, it would move the player up and down on the screen.
Yeah,
completely unrelated, but it shouldn't do anything of the sort. And so there was something weird going on. And my dad was a little bit freaked out about it, and he was just like, we got to take this back to the store. And we were like, oh, don't take our toy, even though it didn't work.
Yeah.
And got rid of it. And so that was it. But what happened to me was like during the, like around, 1980, maybe 81 is when video games got a big like spotlight put on them. Arcades were around now, and because people make it sound like arcades were like a new thing, but really there was those pinball, like, was a thing, in the 70s. Like everybody was playing pinball. There were pinball places you would go, and those just sort of turned into video game arcades,
Yeah.
And so, but of course, new people open video game arcades everywhere. And, you got the Atari 2600 became like this big phenomenon for home video game playing. But my family was not, we didn't have a lot of money. And my stepmom was just not into us having video games. And so, like, I was obsessed with video games, though, so I wanted to play them. And so I knew every kid on the street that had a game system.
Yeah.
And I knew everyone, like, this kid had an Intellivision, this kid had an Odyssey 2, this, has a 2600, he has a Commodore 64 computer. I knew everybody in school that had games. I would talk about games because I couldn't have one myself.
Yeah.
And so it became an obsession. And then I had a friend who worked or went, we all went to the same church, and we had a raffle every year where you sell these raffle tickets to people so they could win a trip to Ireland or something. And my friend, this was my best friend at the time, his family would just buy like $10,000 in these raffle tickets. And it was one of those things where there was like tiers. So like if you sold 15 tickets, you'd get a basketball or something.
Okay.
If you sold 100, you would get a bike. I don't know. I don't remember what it was.
Okay. I thought you meant tiers like paper football tiers.
Yeah.
Sorry to bring that up.
And so, right. Yeah. Tears down my face. Yeah. He was there for that too. But, right. So he ended up getting a computer the one year, and it was like a TRS-80, and it didn't have a disk drive or anything, but it hooked up to a TV.
Yeah.
And, the next year he won again because his family would buy all the tickets again, and he got like a Texas Instruments that did have games on it. So I was like, "Can I have that TRS-80?" I mean, you're not using it, right? It doesn't do anything. So I took that and I found a black and white TV in somebody's garbage, and it was like a portable Motorola black and white TV, and I hooked it up to that, and I taught myself how to program so I could try to play games. And I would write my own text adventures on that thing in BASIC, and it would always run out of memory. I mean, I would be all in my head like, now you're going to go do this, and you're going to travel here, and I would write it all out, and it would just be like, yep, you can't add another line of code. And we had no money, so it wasn't like I could save the games or anything. Like I would write out the whole game. There was no solid state storage or anything, so it was just like my mom would come in the room and shut off, and the game would be gone. So, start it all over again. But for Radio Shack, because that was their computer, for their benefit, they gave you this really thick how to program book. And it taught you everything, that you would want to know about basic programming, graphics and everything. And I didn't become a master programmer from learning that, but it started me on my way.
So I'm so sorry. You probably mentioned it, but how old were you again when you started this? When you did programming?
Yeah, so that would have been like maybe around 10. Yeah, maybe around 82.
Oh.
So maybe about 10.
That's pretty intuitive for a young, guy. Be like,
I had a kid that lived across the street from me that was about a year older than me, and he had a Commodore 64, like one of the first kids to have one of those. And it was when those things first came out, they were like $600, which in today's money I think is $10,000. No, it's not that much.
Yeah, probably.
It was really expensive, and and he was like he went to Catholic school, and he was really smart and a big nerd, and I was always just like, nothing I could do could measure up to this kid, which always sort of drove me harder, sure. Because he always had it better, he new bikes, new toys, but he was like a better programmer as well and everything. So, so part of my drive, I think, was to be like this kid. So, that's what happens.
That's cool. So that's age 10. You kind of get a knack for programming, and since you kind of just jumped into your past first, you're essentially a programmer today, right?
Yeah, I mean, right at this exact moment, I'm not doing too much coding, but I am working in, at a bank in tech, and I can code. Let's put it that way. But my job responsibilities right now are more about making sure our software is compliant with bank policy, which sounds boring, and it kind of is. It's mostly just about paperwork, but there's a lot of it.
Yeah,
I call it paperwork. It's not. We're all on computers. We're not shuffling papers or anything. Counting dollar bills out or something. But
right.
I do miss it sometimes when I do sit down to write stuff. I really enjoy working with it because it's nice to be able to craft something that's going to solve a problem. And somebody's got a problem. They want something to do something. And it's nice to be able to just sit down and make that happen for them, which is not really the same thing as working like with policy, because you're just going through the motions essentially of making sure things are correct. And so,
Yeah, totally. So here you are at age 10 and now, so take us a little bit through, then you built your own, story, which your mom could unplug at any time.
Right.
And your mom is German, right? So I just,
well, this was my stepmom.
Your stepmom.
Right. My real mom, because my parents were divorced, my real mom lived in California, and we would go out to visit her every summer. And she did buy my brother and I an Intellivision. And that console, they still make games for that thing. And
really?
they just released Defender of the Crown for that. And it's surprisingly good looking anyway for Intellivision. Yeah, they actually...
Was that your first real system that you owned?
That would be like at least my family owned, right?
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that company, by the way, they have a new game system coming out. The Amico. It's like a 32-bit system. It has similar looking controllers, but they have screens in them. It's coming out this year, actually. If anybody's interested, look it up. I think it's Amico, Amico. Okay. And it's meant to be like a family system, right? So it's like a 32-bit, but they have all of like the developers that they've had over all these years. So they're like, they have a bunch of games. Like they have all these games. They're like family type games. You know what I mean? Like, and there's inexpensive and stuff like that. But that's pretty cool, actually. I, of course, ordered one because I collect consoles. But so that was like the first system, but we weren't allowed to take it like back to Ohio with us or whatever. So, we would just play it every so often. And we had like 6 games for it,
Sure.
One time we got like the Dungeons and Dragons game and this other game, Bump and Jump. And to this day, I cannot remember how that happened. Like, because we didn't own it and we didn't really have any friends because we were there in the summer, like we didn't like, hey, can I borrow this game? Like, somehow we had 2 extra games. Like, we didn't get them. There weren't like libraries that were like, you guys want to rent a video game? That didn't exist back then. Right. So I don't remember how, but we played a couple extra games. But most of the time, I was driven to go. Like I say, driven, but I mean like I would be very much anxious to go to an arcade because arcades through the 80s and even up until mid 80s, they were still a thing and. You just had to have money, you know what I mean? Like, and I had a paper route. And so if you, and sometimes there would be ads and like flyers and things like, come to this arcade and we'll give you 4 free tokens, and you would take like 10 copies of that and go every day, with the new coupon. And, so, you get obsessed with a lot of arcade games and, and then later, arcade games didn't obviously disappear. I mean, they're still making some of them now, I guess, but they weren't as frequent. You know what I mean? Like they didn't make new ones. But Street Fighter 2 was a huge game when it came out, and Mortal Kombat and that kind of stuff. That progression still happened, and I was very much into those games for quite a while. So that kind of went through like early high school, kind of thing. Yeah. And then I don't know, like when video games at arcades kind of went to that Dance Revolution era, I wasn't part of that. You know what I mean? Like,
no, you were too cool for that.
The light guns and things were cool. That kind of always was a thing. Yeah, but to be honest, I've never actually. Well, I don't know if that's. I saw one at a movie theater once, but like when I went to arcades, there were no Dance Revolution machines. Right.
No, it was like fighting games and side scrollers.
Yeah, shooters and just classic, platformers and things like that. Yeah.
So our grandparents they suffered and they lived through. I mean that's a horrible way to start that sentence.
It's very true.
It's true. They suffered. And they went through things like the Great Depression, the World War II. At least probably our parents. So. Let's talk about the most painful time of your young adolescence. Where were you at the great video game crash of the 80s after the massive failure of the Atari? Talk about that. Was there a time where you were like, this is the end of gaming when you because you kind of grew up and experienced that?
Yeah, no, I did. Speaking of old people, just a curiosity, just a curiosity thing is I recently learned that my great uncle, my grandfather's brother, was also in World War II on the German side. as was my grandfather. Neither of them were, well, I don't know about this uncle. My grandfather wasn't a Nazi, and it just wasn't. They weren't actually. They were German family, but they were all in Poland. But like, Germany moved around a lot. It was a big country. You know what I mean? Like there was wars and Austria-Hungarian Empire and things. Like the borders today weren't the same. Sure. But today the city is in Poland. Back then it was part of Germany. Yeah. And so they were, they were a family there and everything. But anyway, he never came home. My uncle, my great uncle, he ended up in Siberia and saw him again. No idea, which is what happened to a lot of them. And I don't have any history of that. So one thing I do is I read a lot of memoirs from that time period because a lot of my family was over there. And I'm always kind of looking through memoirs of World War II, just on both sides, on the Russian side and the German side, not so much the American side. Plus, we've seen a million Saving Private Ryan movies that we know everything. Yeah. That
you want to know what would happen if the bad guys won.
Right, but
that's what your little text adventure games were.
Right, I'm always looking for like photos and things of my relatives to see if they're out there. But so the video game crash of I do remember being in a toy store when that was going on, and everything was discounted, and it was a weird time because there were bins of games that were all discounted. They were just clearing them out, and there were a lot of systems that had sort of launched but didn't get the traction because the video game crash happened. There's that Vectrex, which was like that one game system that was using a oscilloscope, to draw the things on the screen.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And you had the Atari 5200 and ColecoVision. There may have been a couple of others, because back then you had a lot more game companies and people coming out with game systems in Japan as well. But there was just a crash in the sense that there wasn't people give you different reasons for it, but I think the main reason is that the evolution wasn't good enough, right? To go from like, you have a 2600 at home with kids back then had just, 50 cartridges or something, it was just like it was like an investment that the family made. And that played a decent video game. I mean, the Atari 2600 plays great games, so even today they, people still play them, and that machine was not capable, right? I mean, it was barely, you could turn on. It's like a light switch in terms of strength. Like it, there's nothing. And so like when they said like, well, here's the 5200 or here's the ColecoVision or something, most gamers were kind of like, it's not like, it's not like ray tracing or something happened. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like it's like slightly more colors. Or
they could have 10 more colors.
Right. An extra line of resolution.
You can play as a triangle in combat.
It's like it really, the sound is there's a boop, and now it's like,
right.
It didn't make that big of a. So I think like a lot of people, and also the home computer market was kicking off. So that's when your Commodore 64s and then, your Apples and things where people were like thinking in their head, well, this plays games and I can do like taxes and spreadsheets and print out letters and things, which, maybe printing out like some letters occasionally, but all that other stuff that you thought you were going to do with those old computers, like nobody was doing any of that. Like you did, you know what I mean? Like there was no tax, tax software or anything that worked.
Right.
So most people just used them to play games, And that kind of evolved. And I remember being with Don Cease, who used to be on VGN. And you're gonna die right now. I mean, aren't you?
I'm trying to mute this as I'm coughing.
That's okay. And so Don Cease and he had a Vectrex and a ColecoVision, and we had money. And this was when I was like in middle school with him. And so that might have been like mid 80s, 85, 86 or something like that. Yeah. And we couldn't find anything for his game systems. Really? All of that stuff was gone. Yeah, we went to the stores and we went to a discount, like a real bottom of the barrel discount store, and found one game for the Vectrex that needed a 3D viewer because they actually came out with that back in I have no idea if it was any good. And we were like, well, we don't have that, so we can't buy that. And there was no internet back then. You know what I mean? You couldn't go online and be like, I'm just going to order it from Amazon because I can't find it here. Like none of that existed. So like if it wasn't available, what do you do? I mean, there's,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? You're stuck. So we just couldn't get anything else for those systems. And then it just, boy, it was probably, I was probably in 9th grade the second time around because I took a year off when I went to California.
Okay, I didn't know about this.
Yeah. And, well, you can't take a kid from Cleveland and then put him in like sunny California where his friends are like, you want to go to the beach or go to school? And it's like, we'll go to the beach. You know, it was dumb. So I ended up coming back living with my dad. But Nintendo Entertainment System, right? So Nintendo Entertainment System came out, and I didn't understand it when I was looking at it, because if you look at the capability of the Commodore 64, it's very similar to the NES. They both ran on a 6502 processor. They had a similar RAM footprint. I mean, cartridges could have more, but had a similar RAM footprint, and colors and sound were identical. And I was like, well, this thing's been around since like 83, 84. And now everybody's all like, well, Nintendo. And what I didn't understand was that it's the games, right? It all comes down to the games. And Nintendo was taking, Mario and Donkey Kong and all of that and bringing it to the home in really good ports,
Right.
And nobody else was doing that at the time. And there was a scramble for other game systems to come up. I mean, Sega had a pretty good arcade library. They probably gave Nintendo the biggest run for their money at first, especially in Japan. But that Nintendo, man, that took America by storm.
Totally.
And same with like Game Boy. Game Boy came out and it's like black and white, no backlight, barely can see what's going on. But they proved again that's all about the games, because lots of other companies, Atari was still around, Sega was doing stuff. Everybody's like, well, here's color, and it was like, it's color, but it's blurry, and it's like it eats your battery, and like it's dead in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And so like Nintendo really sort of made it made a huge inroads into people's houses, and it seemed unlikely. I remember the very first commercials for that had that robot.
That's right.
Like
what was his name? Like
Rob or something?
Robbie the robot. Yep, I do remember that.
And it was like moving these like stupid plastic things around.
Right.
And I was like, this is amazing. Like, wow, this is, and they had like really, they had really like ridiculous third-party hardware. Everybody always talks about the glove.
Yeah.
You put that glove on and you can play like, and there was like a U-Force where you could like, move around and stuff.
Oh,
and,
wow,
and none of that,
none of it worked the way they
right, that you envisioned as a kid. And the exercise mat, where you just smack the thing rather than actually do the
you're
exercise.
Supposed to run and you're like, no, you're getting down there and drumming on it. Yeah.
Right. And so, Nintendo's, and that's what they did with the Wii, really. I mean, they knew what they were doing. They sell the dream, but they give you something else. But ultimately, Nintendo proved and has proven over and over again that if you do the games right, the consoles will sell.
Yeah. So to jump in here a little bit, I appreciate. Yeah, like your story is similar to mine in terms of like, even though I'm younger than you by a few years. When I grew up, I didn't have anything either. I wasn't allowed to, and we weren't allowed to because we didn't have any money and we had one TV. So I was like the same thing. I made a lot of friends. Everybody that I was like, who's that neighborhood kid? One of my best friends today, I only went over to his house because he had a Sega Genesis. And this was like in 5th grade. And then that kicked off our whole, friendship. But yeah, dude, I remember I had some hand-me-down Atari thing at some point. I didn't even know at the time. I didn't know, is this a 52? I didn't know it was a 5200.
Oh, really? You had a 50? They had the terrible controllers.
I don't even. All I remember it was the one with the one button. So is that the?
Oh no, that would have been 2600.
Okay, so then I didn't even know another one existed. But then there was that. But by the time
most people didn't.
Yeah, and so I by the time I was getting video games, the Nintendo was already like in circulation. So, but I do remember like garage sales where there's just piles and piles of of old Atari games that people were just shoveling off. Yeah. But the thing about it too, man, is just like those old. And I miss this about video games. They always had the most epic artwork. You'd look at it, you'd be like, you were waiting for some grand, space adventure, like something that looked like Masters of the Universe. You hold a sword up there, and it's just like,
They'd come with comic books sometimes. And Atari Force was like this thing.
Yeah.
And, Atari, Atari, to give Atari 2600 some credit, though, I mean, it was designed from the very get-go to be like the whole family playing the console together, right?
Sure.
Like it originally, like when you bought the first system, it came with the 2 joysticks and a couple of those paddle controllers, and you could play, like it had 4 ports, so you could play 4-player games. And to imagine like the limited power in that system, and they were making some pretty decent 4-player games that the whole family could play. They did an amazing job with what they had, back then, and nobody else was doing anything similar. They're like, hey, we can put a number pad on our controller, and then you can push 1 or 2 players. Like that was their innovation, And
Right.
and Atari was like, we got this driving wheel that you can, move back and forth with your. And none of that was perfect,
Right.
Like Nintendo, they had the game pad, and the pad was a big evolution because
Right.
you had a much quicker, area of movement rather than swinging the stick back and forth.
Sure.
But overall, like Atari, when you look back on a lot of old game systems, like Atari still had a lot of value in terms of that playing all as a family. Because,
Right.
there's games that you can do that. But like if you buy a new console today, you got to take out a small loan just to get 4 controllers.
Right. Too.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's absolutely insane. The amount of money that you have to spend on something like that, let alone even to find a game that's like 4-player co-op. And that, just to keep going on the N64, that was one of the big selling points with like games like GoldenEye and why that was so popular for kids. Is not every kid could get online at that time with like a $2,000 computer and play, games online like Doom and stuff like that with other players. But Nintendo's like, well, here's a 4-player game. Just pay $200 for some controllers, and you can play. And kids did, though. It was a huge success.
Yeah. So then to that point, then I wanted to ask you one more question, kind of about your past, and then we'll fast forward a bit. But what was the first game system that you bought with your own money?
Okay, well, so I did own a Sega Genesis, but that was hot. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. You know what? That was weird. That was
Kevin
weirdly
has a checkered past. Everyone.
That was. Yeah. I'm sorry, everybody. I know. I'm not trying to influence anyone. My brother worked at a department store, and he stole it by taking the trash out and putting it in the trash can and putting the bag of trash on top and rolling it outside.
Yeah.
And he needed money or something, so I bought it off of him for $50. But it wasn't a legitimate purchase. And then, funny enough, I had another friend who worked at a place, and he got somebody's credit card number, and he's like, "Let's order a bunch of video games." And I was like, "Yeah," and we did. And I ended up ordering like every single Sega Genesis cartridge that they made when the system first launched, and I got them all. And my friend was always calling and scaring me. He's like, "Police were just over here, and they were asking about who, did anybody know anybody that had those games?" And I was like, "You better not tell them it was me." He's like, "I'm telling them it was you. I'm not going to jail." And I was all freaking out.
The police
and it didn't happen.
Going to people's house, look for a bunch of Genesis games.
Right. Just, you're under arrest, son. Well, I did have a friend who got busted by the Secret Service for selling hot merchandise back then too, which I didn't believe at the time, because I was like, the Secret Service, like I could see the FBI, but he had the card, and he's like, "Here's the card they gave me," and he told me the whole story. Like they went to Columbus because they had a drop site there, and they were in Taco Bell, and the Secret Service came in with guns, and they were just like, "All right, up against the wall," and they put them both in handcuffs. And my friend was a minor, but the other guy that he was with was an adult, and they took him to this place, and they put the kid, in a room, and they mostly interrogated the adult. And
what are they doing? Like holding up a Streets of Rage?
Right. And well, this was for like all sorts of electronics. I bought my hot VCR off these guys.
Oh, like, my goodness.
Because that's,
you kept them around for a while. They were useful.
We were poor. I mean, this is how you do it, and
other food, but you need.
Yeah, other people have everything that they want, and you don't. You've got to resort to crime. But anyway, yeah. I wouldn't say though. I did buy an Atari 2600 during the big game crash, because everything was cheap. right? And I never owned one. It was too late for it, but it was just like I had the fever. I was just like, I never was allowed to have this.
Yeah.
And now I can get it, and I can get all the games that I want for it. And so I did for a while, but
Okay.
And then mostly I just stuck to computers. I invested a lot of time in the Amiga computer, which was quite capable when it was initially came out, playing 16-bit games.
Yeah.
Very much equal in power to the Sega Genesis. Similar processor, a 6800, Motorola 6800, and I think the Genesis did 65 color graphics, and the Amiga did something similar. But Amiga had a few extra modes, and it had digital sound just like the Genesis did. So, again, you could be on one side or the other. You could be, back then, you could be on maybe it's still like that today, You could be computer guy or console guy. And I was, at that point, mostly computer guy.
Okay. So then did this kick off? And well, I should ask, do you still have that same Genesis? Is it part of your collection?
No.
Okay.
I went through some phases in my life where, I wasn't doing terrible in school, but I wasn't doing great either.
Yeah.
And my brother and my dad would get on me, like, you just sit around, don't do anything, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And you should go do stuff, and and you're in that weird age where, like, you had to be like 15, 16 to actually get a job. You want to kind of work at 13. You're like, I could get money and go, spend it on whatever I want. Like, why can't I have a job? Well, unless you work in a farm field picking fruit, you can't work, kid. Right. And so, what do? You go home back then, and then you just sit around. And so anyway, I would get mad and I would be like, I'm fine, I'm going to sell everything, and I sold it all off. And I don't know if I was wood carving or what I was doing back then. But it was just, periods of time, but I would end up going back to it because there's always some deal. There's always some kid that's just like, I'm selling all my stuff and I'll give it all to you for like $50. And, you'd end up with like 4 computers and 5 monitors and all these things. And you're like, all right, thank you.
Fit that all in your car. Yeah. No, that's funny. That's interesting. So then kind of, let's try to work our way up to VGN. So like
Sure.
You do you have a time limit, by the way? Do you have to leave anytime soon? Okay.
No, I don't know what this goes to, but I'm fine.
Okay, cool. So people are enjoying this in the chat, by the way. I'll bring up some questions a little later when we get to the end. But so talk a little bit about so before I get into VGN, when did you sort of officially start collecting consoles? Because you are a collector. You mentioned that in passing. You have over 200 consoles, right? Currently, or roughly about 200.
Easy. Yeah.
And now you also collect weird snacks from other countries.
I'm not collecting those. We're right. That's just because of COVID.
Right. Yeah. You're ordering. Yeah. So if you ever follow Kevin on Facebook, every day he has a chip
snack.
from
Zimbabwe
or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, you're collecting consoles. When do you get to the point where you're like, I can afford this and maybe I want to make this a hobby?
Sure. So this was after high school, and after when I was being a cook, I started working as my first computer job. And my boss, he wasn't the owner of the company or anything, right? It was like manager, but he's a cool dude, he's a few years older than me. And he got into, he was always doing like, in the early days, it wasn't even really the internet. There was this Freenet thing where you could go online and with universities and exchange messages that would kind of go around through some networking around the world, et cetera. It was early day Usenet stuff. And he would buy and sell things that he was into, like music and movies on VHS tapes and things like that. Because again, there was no internet, so if you wanted something really rare or weird, it was a lot of bargaining, and he got into Atari 2600 cartridge collecting.
Yeah.
And so what he would do is he would be like, well, let's go, like we would go to lunch, and he would drive usually. And he would be like, let's stop at this thrift store. And we would go to like Goodwill. And we worked in like the worst part of Cleveland, like literally the worst part of Cleveland. Like it's dangerous over there. And he would be like, let's go to thrift stores. And it's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
This isn't good. And we would go in there and they would have like at that time, because eBay hadn't really, if it was around, it was like, it was, I don't know, but it was, Nazi medallions or something. I don't know what they were selling,
Sure.
but it wasn't video games. And people were it was just that time where people were like, I've got this old thing. Let's give it to Goodwill.
Yeah.
Or let's give it to Salvation Army or whatever. and you would go in there and there would be consoles sitting there and a lot of Pong systems, and they would be cheap. I mean, they would be like $1 or something, you know? And I was like, well, he's going to collect these Atari. I don't want Atari cards. Like I had one, I'm done with it. Like, I don't know what he's doing. He went on to probably get all of like the most rare ones, the ones you got with dog food and stuff like that. But I just was like, I'm going to start collecting a lot of these systems, and because they were you had the full range in there. I mean, you could find all kinds of stuff, and so I would when we went in there, I would start buying them, and then I was working. I had a job. I'm single, and I eventually eBay started to have them online, but again, this sort of console collecting thing wasn't a thing. Like, nobody was doing it. People were just selling their junk online. Nobody thought to buy an old crappy game system, or especially an old crappy Pong system.
Right.
And so there was all sorts of stuff on there, and it was fairly cheap. I mean, you could get something, for $20 or something. Shipping would probably cost you more.
Yeah.
And I would get all kinds of stuff sent to me while it was inexpensive, and some stuff was broken, or some stuff was more novelty than anything else. These big systems like this motorcycle thing, and just crazy stuff they built in the 80s and the late 70s. And then of course I bought new systems, and constantly bought new stuff. So I kept doing that, and as I kept working, I kept making more money, and kept buying more and more consoles. But I do have a sort of like, I'm not insane, so I won't spend crazy money for consoles.
Sure.
I will spend what some people might consider crazy money on something. Like, I just bought a cassette vision it came out at the same time as the NES in Japan.
Yeah.
I think I spent like $300 on that, and it only had like 6 games or something.
Sure.
And, it makes sense for me because it goes in the collection, but for anybody else, you'd be like, why the F are you buying that? Like, that's
sure.
a piece of junk. Like, you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of, and I have a few systems that, I don't know, most people would be looking at them like, what is that thing? But I have had collectors ask me for them and offered to trade me for some very unusual other items in order to get them. Sure. And I've just said no, because I like, the guy's like, do you want a TurboGrafx that used to be in the back of an airline seat? And it's like, I don't know if there's demand for that. It seems interesting, but I mean, if you're going to give it to me for free, but I don't think I'm going to give this thing up, and
so is your collecting mostly for like posterity, or are you trying to someday turn a profit for it?
Well, I can't keep it forever. I am going to die, and so
well, that's what we think, but we know your plan. Right. We know your cryogenic chamber you got somewhere in there.
I mean, I transfer my brain into a robot and go out into space.
The listeners take a sip. The listeners need to understand. Kevin and I have a lot of history. He did his show for a long time. There are all these rumors about Kevin having robots around the house, and strange things, strange chambers that may exist. That you look exactly the same as you did when I saw you 10 years ago, and your skin looks the same. So you're not really aging. Yeah.
No, it's no. So I have thought about it, and I think that it'll depend, but probably when I retire from working, I'll start selling them off. Now, like I've told you, I'm probably going at some point to do a video series of Will It Work? And going to take one system and plug it in, and let's see if smoke comes out of it. And if it turns on, and if it works, I'll keep it. And if it doesn't work, I'll sell it for junk on eBay.
Okay.
I'm not, except for disk systems, those belts can go bad in them. And that's not necessarily a failure that I can't fix. Some things people will write in and be like, you got to change the caps, or, re-solder this. I'm not doing any of that. I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm just, you do it. I'm going to sell it on eBay. I'm getting old. I don't need it anymore.
Do it.
Right.
So last question on your collection. What is your most prized possession? And you can quantify that however you want.
Wow, it's tough. I don't look at any of them as being really amazing, but I do have a Commodore CD32 that I love the history of that machine, and I have a lot of games for it, which I don't normally collect games. I just collect systems, and I have like a lot of demos, because they used to have, back then you used to have magazines with CD on the magazine. And in the UK, for whatever reason, that game system was was big.
Yeah.
And they had magazines with games, and I have a ton of these CDs for it, for a console that was bankrupt the company. I mean, the company went away.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that's the most prized, but I find that the most interesting.
Huh. That's cool. Well, awesome. Well, thanks for taking us down, that road.
My giant nostalgia trip that I'm on right now.
No, it's good. It's good. But so we're going to fast forward a little bit here, because part of the reason, one of the main reasons I had you on the show was because of our history with a little thing you created called Video Game News Radio.
Oh, yes.
Let me brief the audience real quickly. So Video Game News Radio, everybody nowadays is familiar with podcasting, but in the early days of iTunes, right, when Napster was kind of first, iTunes was like the monetary response to Napster in terms of being able to access music and stuff. Then fairly soon after that, I think 2003, 2004, that's when I started using it. They started having podcasts. And the first thing I did was look for a video game show. So I just typed in the search bar, video games, and Video Game News Radio, your show was the very first one that popped up, and the only one that I can remember. And so I clicked on it and I listened to it. And we'll talk about this as we go along a little bit, however much you want to say. But it was not what I was expecting.
No.
So it's three guys, you, your brother, Brian, and then Don Anderson, who I caught up with Don a couple days ago on your show on Oblast. Right. And so basically, you listen to it and you're like, who are these guys? Like right. One guy sounds like he really knows what he's talking about. That'd be you. And, Brian's just kind of like half asleep. Don says, well, for a long time, I thought Don and Brian were the same guy because they sounded exactly
that tired, I'm not awake. Why am I doing this voice? Yes. Every week.
Just really low, like, hello. Yeah.
Why are you waking me up?
Yeah. And then it was like, like super explicit. And I was like, man, these guys are swearing a lot. But it was mostly your brother.
Yeah.
And I was
like, what are you going to do?
So I was like, yeah. So I was kind of like convicted about it. I was like, should I be listening to this show? And then I went back and listened to it, and I was like, dude, these guys are hilarious. And because the show would eventually devolve into some family story,
just screaming at my brother or something.
Screaming at your brother, talking about some, like that story that you told earlier about, like getting the stolen Sega Genesis. That's like one tiny little bit of history. So the show, I started listening to the show mostly because I couldn't wait to find out what other crazy moment would happen. And I got so involved in the show that I listened to it so consistently at the time. At the time, I was working a job. I mentioned this to you, but for everyone else, I was working a job where I was working at a computer, and I was working for the Maricopa County, which is the big county here. And I was doing quality assurance for scanned documents. So I'd sit there at the computer and I'd hit accept or deny. It was a really, really mundane job. Mm-hmm. But I had my first, first or second generation iPod with the green screen, the little clicker wheel and everything like that. And so I downloaded, your show onto that and a couple other podcasts, which weren't as good. There was a lot of really crappy podcasts at the time. There weren't
there were no shows, really.
Yeah, there were no shows. It wasn't like
talking.
Exactly. Yeah. And it was, literally somebody who just hit record on their Talk Boy or whatever, and then they find a way to upload it. Yeah. So you guys were entertaining, and I listened to your show over and over again, and I started doing what I called tribute shows. So I'd take a year's worth of content, and I'd find all my favorite moments or the moments that I thought were the funniest, and I'd go back and listen to them and timestamp each episode, each part of it. And I used a program called Audacity, which I don't know if that's still around anymore. And I started compiling that. And I was just such a big fan of the show. You guys were like celebrities, for me. And I would give it to you because I was like, oh, well, they'll think I'm cool, basically, and so for a while, for a few years, it became a really big deal. And I don't want to spoil it. And I'll let you tell the story about the genesis of it and how it kind of exploded for a little while there. So as we left off, you're working, you're collecting consoles, you're still into gaming. What's the first thing that when did you first start to hear about what a podcast was, and how did that spark your idea for the show?
Well, I think it helps that I had a website, right, Video Game News, and I managed to secure that domain because I don't know, at that time nobody had thought of that name, but it was a pretty good URL name. And I ran a website for quite a while, and I had my own forum and stuff. This is all pre-Facebook, pre-MySpace. Yeah. And so I did game reviews, and one of the reasons I did is because I hung out with the guys that did Old Man Murray, and which was a really critical inside game news type of thing, is satire website, and those guys went on to Valve. Eric wrote Portal.
That's right. Yeah, I remember that.
Right, and Chet as well. And Chet went on to help make the Valve's VR, that whole thing. And now he's off on some other VR mission or something. And Eric, I think he's currently working on Psychonauts 2.
Oh, wow.
They did, what was that VR version of Half-Life, the Alex?
It was Alex, yeah.
He's involved in that. You know what I mean? So he found his career in writing, starting on Old Man Murray, and they met the guy that owns or used to own Valve, and they hired him. I think between that and then he was selling hot dogs in Calgary or something. I don't know how it all works.
And you had a connection with this guy?
Well, I was friends with these guys. These guys were the guys that I worked with at my first computer job. They hired me, and that's how we knew Sean Baby, right? Yeah. Like we were all together in a way, but they were, Chet and Eric were, they had an office and they had their own servers, right? Yeah. And I had my own stuff. I didn't have an office, but I had my own servers. Yeah. And but so they hosted Sean Baby. They would do all the Old Man Murray. But sometimes if you go back and look at some of that stuff, you can see references to me where I would add commentary, and I would go out to California E3 with them, and we would party with all those guys and things like that. So anyway, they would get free games, and they weren't a review site. And I was like, I went over there, I went to their office, and I'm like, wait, they just sent this to you like for free? Because the games are $60, you know what I mean? And I was like, I think I could do something with this. And so I started to write game reviews, and I formed a company, and I had I made a bunch of PR contacts, which was a lot of work. Mm-hmm. It's not quite as easy as you think to find the right people that are going to mail you product, and you have to show. These days I don't even know how you would prove that you deserve it. But back then you had to show a certain number of people were reading your content, and we were doing pretty good. Basically me, but and I would get like on the order of 20 to 30 games a day.
Holy moly.
But back then you would get like, remember how like THQ would constantly make like every game for Nickelodeon imaginable and stuff, like you would get that, and you would get like all the value software, how many hunting games are you going to play? Like there's 900 different hunting games. And
Cabela's Big Game Hunter.
Yeah, and you got to write reviews. And I was always fair with my reviews. I never because, just because they're sending me stuff, I wasn't going to pull any punches. But you're waiting around all the time for that AAA game that's going to be amazing, and it's so rare to actually get that. Nintendo was also notoriously tight with how they did stuff, because they wouldn't let you keep the games because they were all cartridges, so you had to mail them back. And so I was like, I'm not going to work with them.
And they take them to GameStop and they sold them as new, right?
Right. I mean, I didn't keep all these games. I would sell them on eBay after a while. And sometimes that was helpful for review purposes too, because you could understand a little bit of demand for a game based on what it's sold for. If you put a Nickelodeon game up there, you get $5, and if you put up like the latest Halo or something, you were going to get like, $30-$40 for a used copy. So it was interesting. And so anyway, while I was doing that, though, I realized that I was listening to Shoutcast, which was internet radio at the time. It was before podcasting. And I had a couple of devices that were like radios that actually had tuning dials, the early internet, that would tune different Shoutcast stations. But they were all music. And I like talk radio. And I was like, I bet if somebody had a talk radio thing on here, somebody would listen to me. Like if I did like a talk radio thing, somebody would listen, because AM radio is a thing. People listen to talk radio all the time. Why not have an internet talk radio thing? And I'm sure there was. I mean, Shoutcast was like the open source of radio. there's like 7 million stations, and I'm sure if you tuned it, you could find something eventually, but you'd be there all day. And I was like, maybe what I'll do is I'll get my brother and we'll start a shoutcast station. So that's what we did. And we started, and the idea is in my head at that time was I am into video games. I'm like really into video games. I talk to people like you about video games. And it was a big part of my life. Like it was just like, Chet and Eric, going to Val, very constantly talking about gaming. This boss of mine going to thrift stores, buying Atari 2600 cartridges. Like my life in Cleveland, of all places, was just surrounded by video games. And so to me, it was like this thing that was just all over me. To my brother, could give a crap about video games. Right. His life did not revolve around them. He barely recognized that they existed other than I think at the time he was doing some chat-based RPGing online, and so I was like, well, maybe I'll get him on as the opposite perspective, like I think this new Gran Turismo game coming out on the PlayStation 2 is amazing. Like, Brian, what do you think about that? What? I don't cars, I don't know. Driving. So I drive for a living. I don't want to drive. Right. You know what I mean? And it was like this really sort of interesting dynamic that I thought would be cool because, I think a game is worth $60 to somebody else like him that's like at that time where, it's like that's a lot of groceries, for him. Right. I don't think he's going to buy this game for $60, Sure. And so that became the beginning, and we didn't do Shoutcast too long before I, looking through outlets, I noticed that podcasting was in its very infancy. And I had reached out to Adam Curry at one point, asking him, because there was a call to help put together the list of shows. They had sort of a generic list, and I got to be the guy that maintained the video game list, which was like all of I don't know, four shows or something, mostly music related or something. I can't even remember right now. Most of these shows, just like podcasting today, somebody comes out and they're like, I got a podcast. And they want you, they talk about it and everything, and they do like 2 episodes and then it goes away. You never hear it again. Yeah. And that's how it was back then for sure. And so, but we maintained this list. I was on this list. And then I don't know how long it was between, it was 2004. Yeah. But so at some point, like you said, iTunes just grabbed it and just buried our server. Like we could not serve the demand at all. And nor could most podcasts. Almost every podcast ground to a halt because nobody's server was like, everybody was like maybe feeding like 1 or 2 shows. And then all of a sudden you're just like slammed. But we were like the 13th most popular show. So we came right up on that top 20 list in the beginning.
Of all podcasts, not just
of all, right.
Yeah, you were like, if you clicked on the iTunes thing, you'd like Video Game News Radio would be right there.
I mean, it was like This Week in Tech was like number 1 or something. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, there was nothing to listen to, really. I mean,
do you know how many listeners you had at your peak? Or how many?
The hard thing is that the servers would get buried, but we were balancing somewhere between 10 and 20,000 for a couple of years of consistent users listening. Yeah. And so but there was a lot of ways of a lot of that. It could have been more. It seems like it was just in the sense of, like I mentioned to you before, like I would write in like a letter to some place about nothing to do with video games. Like, my toaster doesn't work really well and I'm having a problem with it. It's burning my toast. Right. And somebody says, well, here's some instructions on how to do it. By the way, love your show. And I was like, really? It's really unusual.
Yeah. So you were kind of famous for a little while.
Yeah, it seemed like that. It was just like, we knew, and I think anybody can go back and, because I still have the whole archive. We knew that we were not, we were not professional at all. Like, right. and shows that listened to us were surely like, well, we can do a better job than this guy. And of course, like that was not our goal to be like an amazing show. We're just trying to be entertaining. And I think that for most people, we succeeded with that. I think that people just found the show fun to listen to and not pretentious, which a lot of shows are just like they're very ego driven, and there's a lot of great shows out there too, but there's just a lot of shows that are not that great. And we just wanted to be a fun show for people, just like listening, talking to your friends, you know what I mean? Because I know we're blue collar people, and it's like, we know that just people mopping floors at night at a Burger King, or working in a warehouse or whatever, that are just listening. And it's sort of a nice way to feel like you're listening to your friends. You know what I'm saying? And listening to something that's more instructional. Like, I didn't think that the way they did the bump mapping graphics was quite the way with the shade. Like, I don't know. That wasn't what we wanted to do. It just wasn't what we wanted to do.
Well, and from my perspective, right, it's somebody who kind of, again, stumbled upon your show. I think that's what kept me, was the personalities and the fact that you did, and still, even to this day, the reason we're talking today is because you really did feel, it's odd to say this, but we felt like we knew you guys, because you would talk about a lot of your personal stuff. So I remember at some point after like 6 or 7 years, you were like, we don't have any more stories. So
right.
We don't know, like, we're completely tapped. And
so we did Midwest Wasteland. We were just like, we've told you everything we can.
It's like everything about your life. We went through Don, who was the other host, like his whole marriage, divorce, had a kid, like all that stuff, that whole thing. Yeah. All, like, for a long time, Brian was playing World of Warcraft. That was his, like, one segment. Yeah, that was like the one thing. And it was funny to listen to you because you took the show seriously. And there are times where Brian just didn't want to come on, and he'd be like, you're like, I only ask you to do this one thing, just talk about World of Warcraft. Tell me what you do. I don't know, and you get mad and then, be upset. And
you're on a show for 2 hours. You do it like once every 2 weeks or something. I give you 5 minutes just to talk about the game that you're playing at home, and people are like, I don't have any idea what to talk about. Skip me. And you're just like, it used to irritate me, because I wanted the show to be, I wanted everybody to be involved, and I didn't want it just to be my voice.
Yeah. Well, then, so nowadays, and this kind of, we could spend a lot of time on VGN, which is perfectly fine. I think part of also what I want to talk to you about is now here we are, 2021, and especially, I'd say, in the last 10 years, but it really feels like in the last couple of years, the advent of not only podcasting, but YouTubing and even streaming, which is, kind of what we're doing now, is really taken off, and everybody's kind of doing it to some degree, and COVID ramped all that stuff even more. But in the early days, did you feel as though there was an opportunity here to really monetize in a big way on what you were doing? And how did you try to tackle that in those early days?
I didn't, and I still don't think, like, you do have the Rogan, right? It's, people point to him, and he makes probably bank on his podcast, Tom Segura and things like that. Yeah. Although they have they're still working, you know what I mean? Like, they still have these other careers. So I don't know if their podcasting is really like buying their Ferraris or anything, you know? Sure. So, but no, there's not enough listeners. I mean, there never were. And you'd have to be in the top 10 or something to have the kind of money to in advertising, right? Now, YouTube has viewers. You can literally see that, a lot of these people will put up something silly and have 7 million viewers, right. And you will not get those sorts of numbers podcasting. For what I think viewing videos is easier. It's viral. You click it, it's on. You can share it through social media, which of course is probably what magnifies all that YouTube stuff. Where podcasting is, it's a little bit like, if you don't know what it is, you don't really know how to seek it out. Then you got to subscribe to it, and then when you want to listen to it, you have to be able to find it. It's just not as easy as just clicking on a video that you see somewhere. So we're just never going to get those numbers. So we would never get that kind of money. And so I realized that if you make it a little bit professional, you can be a giant bomb, and you can have a better reach. But again, it's kind of like, I don't know if you're going to make like the kind of money that you wouldn't have to, that you could stop working, maybe, but it's a risk too. And it just seemed to me like it wasn't worth the kind of effort, because it just wouldn't happen. I mean, if we had a benefactor or something that would have said to us, like, we'll pay you guys to do this, quit your day jobs, we absolutely would have done that, and done, tons of shows and stuff like that. But
what was your outro tagline? Like, three guys who who aren't paid but would like to be or something
You're
like
that. Right. Yeah.
It was like your tagline of everything. Do you remember what it was?
You're very close there. It's like three guys who aren't being paid but would like to be. It's something like that.
Yeah.
So,
I'm going to bring this up here. You can see this, right, on the screen? Can you see the question?
Oh, yeah, the spill.com days. Hey, you skipped the spill.com days from friend till the end. That's where I first heard Kevin. I missed the VGN train. Spill was great.
Was that with Corey?
Yeah, Corey. He was on. He sent me an email like to be on the show, to be on my show, and I ignored it for like 6 months. I didn't ignore it. I didn't know, like, I didn't check the email that he sent it to. And so I found it much later. He agreed to be on the show. He had a good personality, as everybody knows.
Yeah,
he had a good radio voice, and we had him on a few times, I think. And then he had the idea that, well, he was told by Hollywood.com that he had to do a video game show. And he didn't know who he was going to get involved with it, but he started with me. I want to be careful what I say because I really like him and I like the way he thinks and I like the way he produces stuff. But I didn't like the way we did those shows because it was sort of forced laughter a lot, right?
Sure.
And
this episode,
and there's a lot of editing that goes into that show.
Yeah.
And I'm a type of person that if it's funny, I'm going to laugh for sure. I have an easy laugh, I think. But if it's not funny, I'm not laughing. Like, it's just, you're not saying something funny to me.
Sure.
You're not getting a laugh out of me. And so that was, I think, a little bit hard for him because he's used to his co-hosts being very, I don't want to say forced laugh, but maybe being easier laughing than me.
Sure.
And so we needed more people. And he got in Jeff and, of course, Jason, the Murph. And then that was a good group. And unfortunately, like Hollywood.com had some, they had their minds made up on certain things that they wanted. I believe they wanted Corey to do a lot more animation, and it's difficult for him to do all of that, and as well as trying to keep the quality of the shows up where he wanted them to, because he did put a lot of work into editing those shows. He recorded them, and you know how it was. He recorded them in the weirdest way. Like, he was on like the left channel, and we were on the right channel, and we were in different volumes. And, it was really odd, but he made it work. And he would play the video games, and Jeff especially would that guy like just will play a game beginning to end. Like, I don't know if he eats or what. Like, if it's a 40-hour game. He's just going to start it and he's going to play it all the way through. It'd be Dark Souls, whatever it is, no matter how mercilessly difficult, where I'm the kind of guy that's like, I got a job. You know what I mean? Like, I can't come home and spend 40 hours on a video game. If it's killing me constantly, I'm like, I'm done. I'm not playing this anymore.
Sure.
I'm more of a casual gamer.
Yeah, it Spill didn't come along for quite a while, right? Because I knew I jumped in there.
Oh yeah,
I'm actually very surprised that this guy, Friend Till the End, I know him outside. I'm really surprised that he knows about you and Spill.com. Like, I had no idea that he knew about that. But going back just a little way. So VGN is starting to take off. You get a base of listeners, me being one of them, and also our buddy Showtimed, who says canned laughter, Corey. That's our boy John Lower, who I met today for the first time. Did you see?
Yes, you're on a nostalgia trip. You see me. You talk to me twice in a week.
I know, man. It's taking taking it all back around.
Did you guys go get pizza?
Yeah, we did. We went and got pizza.
Excellent.
He works a job that's like involved in taxes and stuff, and like helping prep tax stuff. And he travels a lot, so he happened to be in my hometown here in Arizona. So we were like, we got to get together. And so he started listening to the show in 2004 as well.
Oh, okay.
So he and I have basically known of you guys for, what is that, 16 years? My math, 16, 17 years coming up on, which is nuts. And I know. And
you were like in high school or something when you started.
Just barely out of it. We were all, these guys are cool. And nobody was as nobody could match your guys' crazy stories, your personality. Everybody everybody thought Brian. Now I know a little bit better, but everybody thought Brian was like this menacing, like figure that would just like, punch you in the face as soon as he saw you. But now that I'm like friends with him on Facebook and everything, I'm like, yeah, he just seems like a big teddy bear in a lot of ways. So
yeah, that might stab you. If
he might. Yeah, he has an edge. But it's cool, and I don't remember how I got on your show initially. I think it was because I would write, right? Because at a point in time, you had a lot of writers, and you'd have to pare it down, and you'd do like a contest, so you do it, right? So every once in a while, I remember the first time my email got read, I was like showing all my coworkers, look, this video game podcast, like they read my letter. To me, that was as big a deal as getting read on the radio. And so you have all these. I know this is
No, that's fine.
Going a little crazy.
I get
it. We didn't know any better, and it's just kind of like it was cool, and you're in the ground floor.
Sure.
So I get introduced to the show, and then I think the first time you had me on was it after I did the tribute show? Probably like 2 or 3 years into it. But then I started coming on, like you would have some regular guests, like Akuma would come on frequently. Yeah. Then you'd have you had guys like when Don went away for a little while, you had Larry Mack come on, and you had Cease for a while. So you had like your guys that were your regulars, but then you had kind of your guest spots like me. So
you evolved into a regular for a while. I mean,
eventually I did. Now, to be honest, I think I was probably one of the most polarizing guys because I didn't really fit the mold. I'm not like
you're not undead from Cleveland.
Yeah, exactly. I wasn't. Yeah, exactly. I wasn't from Cleveland. Pretty, grew up in church and everything, outspoken Christian guy. And I think for some people, it was like, I was just a weird cog in the wheel of like, I would say things and it would throw off the flow. It would get awkward.
Oh, no, it didn't. No, I think one of the aspects of our show is that we're all older, right? We're all of the same, around the same age. I mean, my brother is older by a few years than I am. And even when we were doing the show, 16, 17 years ago, we're still pretty old, and gaming there's interest. You have different interests when you're younger than you do when you're older with video games. And I always felt it would be nice to have somebody that was younger on the show because it would create that balance that I was looking for initially, like I said, where somebody that's really into it and, you could be like, this game is great and I'm having a lot of fun with this, and then my brother like, this sounds terrible, etc. And that was the whole thing. So having you on the show was good. It was good that you felt that it was polarizing, but that was kind of the point because it did generate a lot of conversation, and at least somebody on the show knew what I was talking about sometimes when I was talking about video games.
You're like, you're talking about adventure games and Brian has no idea. He's like,
no,
we're doing a video. I remember that you couldn't handle that. He's like, we're talking about video games. You don't even know what adventure
Anderson was in such a depressed state. He was playing NASCAR and just driving in circles. Like
Breeders' Cup and the NASCAR turn left.
Poor guy.
Speaking of that, dude, so meeting up with John has a really good memory. He has more memories of the show than I do, Showtime. And he reminded me of the time where Cease was on and he talked about Street Fighter 4, which is like an ultra popular game. And he gave it like a 1 star or something like that. Yeah. And I called him out on it or something. And then like the next show you like had me on and I gave him like a real review or something like that. I was just like,
that let me tell you. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Because anybody that wanted to play a fighting game, they'd be like, oh, Cease said this sucked. I'm like, no, like Cease doesn't play fighing games. He doesn't
exactly. Like
I took it so seriously. Yeah.
It's the blue collar mentality, just that the guys aren't into video games. Like this sucks. Whatever.
So we did it for a long time. You inspired, Corey Coleman of Spill.com of Spill, and he would come on and he'd be like, dude, you inspired me to do all these things. Your show, like, totally. Huge props. I did my own stupid show for a while, which wasn't very good, but it was fun. And then Akuma, which started his whole network, and he's been doing that ever since.
Yeah.
But then, so tell me a little bit about like over the last few years, it's been harder for me to keep tabs on things, mostly because I haven't been able to be on the show because I go to church in the evening, and that's when you guys have recorded. Right. Mm-hmm. So, but for years, and I had your show still downloading on my RSS feed. Yeah. But talk a little bit about like how things dissipated. Like, when was the last time you recorded a VGN show, and kind of like what you're doing now and what your plans are with podcasts
Sure.
in general.
So my brother is in the initial view of the show, like I said, was key to the show, and he has, like you said, a lot of crazy stories. He's a character in and of himself. He'll interrupt anybody. He'll talk over you. There'll be all kinds of background noise and just nonsense, but everybody loves that kind of thing. They love the adventure of the show that's going on when my brother's there. And he's a truck driver, and he has a very difficult schedule. And so I tried to flex around that as much as I could. Then Anderson as well became sort of in and out. He had a daughter, and it was hard on weekends because that's when he had her. Sometimes he'd be on the show while he's driving, taking her like 3 hours one way and 3 hours back, or whatever he was doing. Yeah. It was very difficult. And we all love Larry, but Larry doesn't have a lot of stories. Like, Larry is like, he's great for some background laughter or some comments or whatever, but
all his stories are like wildly inappropriate.
Yeah, right. Doesn't have a lot of content. And so the show was hard to do without that kind of content. And you're already dealing with the fact that, we're doing gaming news, and if there's nobody commenting on it, it's just boring. Yeah. And so I felt like we could transition this more into a Midwest Wasteland format, but Midwest Wasteland we were tapped out of stories on that. Mm-hmm. And so we did What's Going On in Cleveland, where we talk about the Metro news more or less, because if you live in the city, Metro news is crazy. I mean, it's just nuts. And we would talk about that for a while. We did that for a few months. Again, not really in the direction I kind of wanted, so I let it die. I just kind of stopped it for a while. I worked 2 jobs in my career because I sort of fell into this second job that's really great, but it's so it's really time consuming working two jobs, and I have a social life too. You know what I mean? Like, I go out and do stuff, so I just didn't have the time to do it. And just recently, within the past month and a half, we started up Oblast again, which is the interview show I do with Donnie once a week, because just doing a show with Don is it's easier, right? Like, one guest or one co-host is a lot easier to try to manage rather than 4. And we're not talking about video games. We're talking about more of current events, I would say. Sure. And doing interviews. So we're doing that now. That's working out really well. We're going to bring back Midwest Wasteland once a month. And I'm probably going to bring back VGN maybe 2022. Okay. And that's not going to include any of the original hosts except me. And we're going to have all new hosts. But more on that as I get there. Yeah, I didn't know about this. I have to have the time to spend on it. Yeah, it's the plan. I've talked to the other guys about that, and the rest of it, like, if you love the original guys, they're going to be on Midwest Wasteland. You'll be able to hear them, etc. It's just that if you're going to have a video game show, you need to have people that play video games on the show. Sure. So I'm just waiting for my invite, bro. I just need to find a girl that wants to be on the show. I just would like a female voice. Sure. I know some that might want to do it, but I got to make sure they're still playing video games. So we'll see. What is So I'm trying to go right here. I'm trying to pull this up. You have a Patreon, right? For yes. Oblast? Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna do this. See if I can do the screen share here. Is that it? Yeah. Cool. So you said you just started this back up a little while ago, a couple months ago. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like, but you said you already have quite a few Patreon or patrons. Is that how you say it? Yeah, we've gotten a whole bunch of people that joined. Initially, the Oblast feed amazingly hadn't been updated in 5 years. I hadn't posted anything in 5 years, and our shows are downloaded over 1,000 times every time we post one. Wow. And we've got about 20 patrons so far, which is really nice. I'm so glad that people want to support the show. I mean, it's only $2, which a month, which is, I think, enough that it just basically helps us with our server costs. And we want to do some things like get some updated graphics and, just the usual kind of stuff to sort of help the show stay. I want the show to support itself. I do work 2 jobs. I can obviously afford it myself to keep it going. But the issue is that I'm the kind of guy that like is like, I haven't watched Netflix this month, I'm canceling it. You know what I mean? Like I'm going to save money where I can, and I spent for years a lot of money on VGN, and we at times we had people contribute, which is great when people do, because it does really help. But it was always coming out of my pocket, and it becomes an irritant, I guess, at times when you're sort of the only one on a team doing something, and so having people contribute just makes it a little easier. And I try to make it very fair, and we give a lot back in the Patreon, but we're also not going to be like, we'll send you a cookbook and a laser engraver, and if you are this tier, we'll do this. I did one of those a long time ago, and I realized that that's just ridiculous.
That's a headache, man. Like,
I can't find the time to do it all.
Give away like some dirty sock you got sitting around, and it's like, here, this is from my room.
Not ideal thing to do.
Some bath water. No, dude, I name popped up that I totally forgot to mention. Karate Dog.
Yes,
Karate Dog. Like I still follow him on Instagram, and he's just like posting pictures of his kids.
Oh, you and I are friends. I talk to him all the time.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, he'd be fun to get on this show someday.
Yeah, he's in Canada now. He couldn't handle Trump. Moved to Canada.
Oh boy, he was that hardcore.
I don't think it was just that. He there we go. It was more like his wife was an engineer. Yeah. And there was opportunities in Canada for them to go, and they were raising their daughter, and it was a good transition for them to go up there, and so that's where they're currently at. They were as a couple, they were the ones that were they went to Kosovo to teach people English, like in a war zone. They went to like bad parts of Korea to do similar things at the time, so they've been in all sorts of crazy places, and they were down south, and it wasn't great down there for them either. So this was sort of like an opportunity for them to, the family and all this sort of stuff to get situated to raise their kid. And Canada just seemed ideal for them.
No, that makes sense. His show, what did he do? 8-Bit Radio? Was that his show?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It was, dude. Now that was the other one I listened to. So he had some funny episodes. Karate Dog was a funny dude. He just
had a really weird perspective on stuff. He'd have his dad on there. Like, his dad would lock himself out of his car.
Oh, wow. See, I must have stopped listening at a certain point because I never got that far.
Yeah, it's just silly things like that,
I'm just noticing every one of these things has like some hot video game chick.
It was just the trend at the time,
Yeah, because that's how you get people to click on it.
Right, on YouTube, right.
But it looks like the last time I was on the show was in 2015. So let me ask this, because somebody, one of my buddies on here is, like I said, is interested. Can you get all of the old shows from here? Or
so if you become a Patreon,
okay,
and a patron of us, the entire archive is in our Patreon. You can't see it here, of course, because you have to pay. And there's a link, and it will allow you to get all of our shows up until maybe 2015, which is basically everything that's not on the RSS. So you can get the tribute shows, you can get the videos. Somehow that collection also had that interview you gave me about religion one time, a long time ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I have no idea how.
I think I did that for school.
I don't know how that person got a hold of it, but it was in the collection. Because this fan of the show put this together. It has like the Don and Dons. It has everything.
Wow.
And it's all in there. And it's anything that you're looking for is in there.
So the first
except
episode,
that religious interview, I took that out because it was just
it was a
nothing wrong project with it. It's just a little bit weird to have that in there. So
okay, cool. So you can go back and you can get all the tribute shows. You can go all the way back to the very first episode.
Yes, yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I kind of thought they got lost because for a while, weren't you asking me if I had the thumb drive that you gave out at one point, or
I might have, like somebody had asked, somebody had mentioned that they had a complete collection, except they were missing like 8 shows.
Okay.
And I was trying to find those 8 shows or something. And it's not that I don't like want to keep the shows, you know what I mean? Like, but it's very hard because we moved through a lot of different platforms in media. We used a lot of different services at the time that were, some were excuse me, we're maybe promising more than others, you know.
Yeah.
Hey, we'll advertise for you, we'll do things, you know, the costs, and you know, you can take callers, you know, we did that for a while.
Right.
And so, you know, we have these different formats that we were sort of broadcasting on because the show was live.
Right.
And not all the time was it easy to get copies of those shows. And I would record them. But you know how it was, like sometimes that Audacity would just break. You would like save something out and just crash in the middle of it. And you're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And then you had to get this tool and try to go through a recovery process.
That was awful.
Yeah. So it was a very hard thing to do. And so, but we do have I think we do have the majority of the collection, and the rest you can find on the RSS.
That's great. So, yeah, my buddy Andrew, who goes on here by Super Sleuth, he's interested in the show, but, well, that's great. So, yeah, I'll fast forward then. So today, well, let me ask you this. Do you regret not jumping on the YouTube bandwagon early on when this, like, with
I
this
don't have a face for YouTube. I do realize that girls have a certain draw for that, right?
Sure.
You know what I mean? If you've got a girl in a cute shirt and she's got, you know, good makeup and she can talk about anything, you're going to immediately get like 1 million views, and you're going to generate some money.
But you got like the nerds. You got like the Linus Tech Tips and those guys. Like,
for sure. No.
Totally
I'm just saying, like,
show.
you can, but there's like a lot of competition and that kind of thing, and there's a lot of trolls.
Yeah,
and it's still a very full-time thing. And I do respect people that, like, if you look at a Tech Moan or something like that, these guys are, you know, one guy talking about a piece of technology, probably edits everything himself. Has some pretty, you know, good lighting and a decent camera, and makes a whole show. And you know, he's probably retired, say this guy, but anybody, you know, a lot of people do it for a living. And they can, you know, go through the whole thing of editing it and putting it all together. That's great. That's really great. I'm also old enough to know that these formats don't last. Like, what's popular on YouTube now, 5 years from now, no one's going to be going to YouTube. I mean, maybe they will, of course, but that's just how it is, you know. Like, people go to TikTok and, you know, they're watching 30-second videos. You had what do they call those things before it was TikTok and it was on Twitter?
Well, they had like Snapchat and that kind of stuff. And
yeah, but they had like the 7-second video thing on Twitter.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about. The Vine.
The Vines, right?
Yeah,
Vines, and you know, and I was always of the mind that all of these technologies aren't going to last, and so it would be very hard to actually make a living at this, to take a risk, right? To take out the $100,000 loan and be like, this is what I'm going to do, and make that the focus, because you know, you're not necessarily going to get it. So I definitely have the talent and the skill. I know people like you that are good at video editing. We could have all gotten together and made a much better product. And we could have appealed to a wider group of people. But, you know, when you get like 1 million views of a video, I think the number is something like you get $600. Really? And if you get, you know, that's great. If you get 10 million views, wow, you got $6,000. But if you only get 1 million views, you've got $600. If you have a staff of 4 or 5 people, $600 isn't going to really spread around that far. And then you got taxes and everything else. And so it's sort of like, you really kind of got to know that you're going to make it. And like we talked about PewDiePie, and there are some people out there that just sat down and started playing video games and are now millionaires. But I don't think that's common. And so I don't think so. I don't think I made a bad bet. You know,
this is Showtimed. Saying it's $4,000 now per million.
It? Maybe, yeah.
Which is, I mean, it's still like, it's not easy to get 1 million views.
No,
I mean, you're lucky if you get that. But there's other ways of monetizing, right? Like, I mean, you still have this old school logo, but honestly enough, if I go back to it here, this is actually still, that's just still pretty legit logo.
Yeah, we had a guy make that for us. It was a really terrific. It was like that could be your avatar on Xbox too. We got involved with that because of all games.
Yeah, it's totally like ahead of its time. I think it's got that like, oh, sorry, I keep clicking away from it. It's just got that simplistic logo. Like a lot of people are trying to figure out, oh, how can I say the most in the least amount of words, you know, and that's a brand right there. And it looks kind of metal, you know, which is kind of, you know, what you guys are all about.
Right.
But but that's so I mean, if you're going to do this show now, by the way, if you're gonna film yourself and you want help editing, I'm more than happy to send me the hard copies and I'll do all the editing for you.
Playing video games, maybe you'll be on the show. But I don't know the timelines, the timing on this. I'm going to have one guy from Japan on, and one guy from Europe
to do your
for VGN.
Oh well, I'm sorry. What I'm talking about is I'm talking about your thing. We're going to try to see if your consoles work.
Oh yeah, we can work on that together. That'd be fun.
Yeah, just send me something and I can do some stuff.
We can. That might. I don't think that's going to get millions of viewers, but I think it'll be. Especially if something catches on fire, we'll all have a good time watching you put it out with a fire extinguisher.
See, the good thing about YouTube, this is the thing, and I want to talk about this a little bit because you've got your finger on the pulse of technology, like you said. You know, you work in it, you've followed it for however many years, and the things that seem to stick around on YouTube are stuff that's like really valuable. Hey, here like a how-to video or a like here's some insight. Here's something that's helpful. Because how often do we go, especially nowadays, if you don't know anything about anything, like, oh, how do I change the oil in my car? Oh, I'll go to YouTube and they'll have somebody will have a video about it.
Right.
It's like I want to know something about gaming history, and you have gaming history literally in physical form,
right?
So you could do a ton with that, and you like to talk, and you're a good writer. And
guys out there though that are just like they're rich out of their minds or something, and they're just like
production value.
I just purchased this perfectly pristine Atari Jaguar, never opened. It was $7,000. Let's crack it open now and see how. I have all the games right here, every one, even the misprinted ones. Like this one had an L instead of a T.
You know what this is? That's your old neighbor that used to be better than you at everything.
Right. But I mean, those guys are on there already, and I'm always thinking like, if they're gonna do that, then like people should watch that. Like that's gonna be more polished than what I'm gonna. I put up something like I had this console from Thailand, and I made a video about it. And because it was in PAL, so it was black and white, and I was able to like play it, but I was like, why is this in black and white? This is really weird. Yeah. It was like a clone system of an NES or something. And I had this video, but then people were like writing in there like, you don't even know what PAL is. What the hell? You get all these trolls. And of course I know what PAL is, but you know, it's like,
sure.
But I would get people that would be like, your video is the only video I found with this game console. Like you're the only guy that has a video about this, you know?
Means something.
And then people
your bitterness you bring to it, you know.
I had 6 of these consoles when I was a kid.
Whatever. You know, like you wouldn't be doing it if you didn't think there was some value. So just
I know.
You gotta have somebody with a catchy tagline, like "Let's see if this explodes," you know, and everybody will click on it.
Well, that's just the thing because, like I said, I bought a lot of these things at Goodwill. I bought a lot of them used. I didn't try them. I mean, some things like those old game systems, they had that TV switch box thing on the back with the RF modulator. And so, I don't even know if they work. I know I hooked up the Atari 5200 once, and that has the weirdest, scariest power system I've ever seen. Because, you had that RF switch box for the back of the TV where you had to turn it to channel 3, and then you screw it into the back.
That's right.
And the way the 5200 worked was you put the power into the switch box.
Yeah.
And then the RF cable, there's a one wire, it looks like a speaker wire.
Yeah.
You plug that in to the thing, and that actually powered the system as well as did the RF. So this metal box behind your TV is like a live, like electrical thing, and you've got this one wire, and and it goes bam, and there's like a spark, and it's just like what the and then it works.
Tesla coil coming out of it.
Seem like kids use this. It sounds horrible. Like they were wet or something out of a bath. Just dead on the ground or something. Parents like, what happened? And I just tried to turn on the 5200. He died. That's how things work. It would never sell today. Like people would be like, this thing's a fire hazard.
Amazing. Well, so okay. Well, let's bring it full circle here. So we talked a lot about your history of gaming, which covers pretty much all of like modern gaming as we know it, right? Like
pretty much
the history of it, which is awesome. So, in your opinion, gaming as it exists today, I'm just going to ask: do you think it's better or worse than it has been in the past? And I don't mean like obviously graphically it's better, but just
I know what you mean.
But
we have a lot of art projects that I call now, right? You know, like educational art projects and things that are into video game world that are we didn't have that before. Nobody was making like, and you could argue that certain games were artistic, and I'm not trying to say that, but nobody was going into making a game and thinking like, I'm going to make a work of art. Like, you know what I mean? Like they were like, how can I make money selling this to kids? Like that's what they were doing. And now we've got a lot of games that are artwork, and we also have a lot of different styles of art in games, which it was also not really a thing because I think there was like a push to make games more realistic looking all the time until around, you know, maybe PlayStation 1 had a little bit of it, you know, Katamari Damacy and those sorts of things, PlayStation 2 and Dreamcast and everything. But that's when it started to transition, you know, and then you start getting into these games now that are a lot more artistic, and I have a lot of respect for that, but I'm not always sure these are the games I want to play, you know, like I see what you're doing where I can like do watercolor on a mountaintop and things, but that's not what I'm coming home from work and wanting to play.
You're not playing Flower when you get home.
Right. Like it's like they're
so
novel
serene.
and Journey and things. They're really great, and I'm not knocking them, but it's not. I don't know. And so, but then we have these franchises that never die and don't evolve, and they only evolve like. And I want to be careful because I don't want to piss off anybody. But you know, like your Call of Duties, your Halos, your arena combat games. Like Fortnite's a great game, right? And it has some ideas. You know, the play area shrinks as you get closer together. You can build like wood things and climb up and all that. At the end of the day, it's still a sophisticated game of tag, right? You're picking up an object that's a weapon. You're shooting at somebody and you're trying to knock them out before they knock you out. And that has been going on now forever. And it has not, the gameplay has gotten tighter and you know, but it's like, I've got it. Like I got it. I played it. I've played it a lot. Like I'd want some new experiences, and we're getting sort of art and we're getting kind of refinement, and we're not getting a lot of really new experiences sometimes though. But you know, I think like things like Connect and Wii Motion were good ideas, like to try to say like, what else can we do? What else can we do with gaming that makes it a little bit more fun for the family, a little bit more interesting physically? VR makes me kind of want to vomit most of the time when I use it, but it, you know, it's trying to do different things. I like that sort of stuff, but I don't feel like that when I sit down and look at core games now, and I have PlayStation 5, I have both Xbox Series X and S, and I'm looking through the game libraries. I feel like I've just bought the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4 for the first time because the games are basically all the same. Like they're just the same group of games.
Yeah. I mean, gaming's been over since 2005, you know. I keep playing them. I love all of them. I think that there are games that are great, right? But like Assassin's Creed, like how many Assassin's Creeds are you gonna play, man? There's just like, you know, they're gonna make one about my father pretty soon. They're going back it's
in
gonna
time.
be about your uncle in Germany,
right? Yes,
that'll be what do they call it? It's not the abacus, it's whatever.
And a lot of these open world games, like, you know, Grand Theft Auto and Take-Two Interactive, like Red Dead Red Dead 2 is amazing, looks great, fantastic game. But then you get in these other ones where you're kind of just like, they put you in like a jungle somewhere and they're like, now go find your missions and talk to people and run around and it's like, oh, I don't have 7 years to play your video game, man. Like, you know.
What are you trying to do? Those kind of things,
and Japanese, I think, in a way, haven't evolved either. Like they're still in the PlayStation 1 and 2 RPG mode. They love those and okay, they add a lot to them.
Yeah.
But they're mostly still the same kind of thing. Like I was an orphan brought up. I was a great evil I must defeat. So I like it all. You know, I like the Switch. I I play everything that I can, but yeah, I'm just a little bit disappointed that we haven't evolved to some new game engines. Maybe is what I'm looking at. New ways of doing things that makes games a little bit more. Because on PlayStation, the original PlayStation, they were trying all kinds of stuff. They were trying to see what stuck because we were going from that 2D Genesis, Super Nintendo. You know, there was a little bit of that VX stuff or whatever, Star Fox and things, but hard driving.
If I could interrupt you, because that was going to be my question. Do you think what you're looking for is the answer is in hardware or software?
Well, it's not in the hardware, right? Well, it could,
because you're talking about new experiences. The way I initially interpret that is something like VR, or it's like, well, okay, because I'll be honest, like VR is obviously it's not perfect, but I admit when I put on the PlayStation VR helmet and did some of those things, I was like, wow, this works. Like this is like, you remember we've been thinking about VR since
really in a room. This is
since like Lawnmower Man, back in the day, and just like
for sure.
You had those horrible demos that you play at the fair, but now you have something where even though the resolution isn't great and the graphics could be improved, it like the beginning is there, and I was like, after a while, I really forget that I'm sitting in a room if I take it in. Yeah. So there's an experience in that way, but to be honest, like there's also a large amount of people that don't want to experience most of their games like that because it's cumbersome. It's not. It's just kind of like board games. Like people that like board games are not looking for board games necessarily to be much more than what it is. We want to be able to sit. I want to be able to sit with the potato chips on my lap, beer in one hand, the controller, and just kind of like I don't want to be super active. And
go ahead.
But one of the other things is it's hard because we're in an era, and this kind of touches on a little bit. Like we're in an era now where games are not just trying to be the most realistic as possible. They're now also going backwards to the games that you grew up with, you and I.
Right.
And now you're seeing like now sprite graphics are kind of a thing. It's like now people they want to play games that are just gameplay, no story at all, like none of that. So it's like there's like something for everybody in a sense. But then at the same way, to your point, how does, I'm sorry I'm making this kind of a long loaded question, how does gaming evolve in the way that you're looking for? Like you mentioned a few things before I interrupted you, but kind of explain that a little bit.
Well, I think Kinect was a good idea that wasn't implemented right. And I think because Microsoft had this competition with Sony, they had to remove it from Xbox One. And they had to get the price down. And developers weren't really embracing it because developers are making games. They have to be cross-platform, right? Yeah. You make a game just for Kinect, you can't sell it on PlayStation. It's a risk. But, if you think about it, like the ability for the unit to both hear you and to be able, like you could point to something because the new one could see your fingers, and you could have a much more immersive, because think about a lot of games. There's a lot of games that one of the biggest struggles in 3D games is to try to point to something that you want something to do. You're usually sliding something around the ground, like a circle or something, and you're like, go over there. Where I just moved that circle to, or whatever. I want to throw this grenade. Show me like that crazy, upside down U or whatever. So I throw it and it's not going to blow me up or whatever. And Kinect could have embraced a lot of that gameplay where you were still sitting on your couch, but you could have been like, go, telling your teammates, go there and point on it at a big TV, and it would know what you're pointing at. Sure. And if you wanted to throw a grenade, you could just throw the grenade, or you could throw the football, and they could have done that. And I think that would have really sort of made the experiences that we're all currently playing, the same games we're playing, but just better, because we could have made them a little bit more intuitive. And I think that would be good. Now, to answer your question, though, in terms of do we need hardware? I don't think 3D's I don't think VR is forever, but I don't think it's going to take over console gaming the way some people imagine it will, because it leaves too many people out. And so But you need something like it. Nintendo's constantly trying to innovate, but unfortunately, Nintendo is also trying to innovate with the cheapest possible hardware that they can muster. They want to make something that costs them virtually nothing that they can sell for an immense amount of money, and so they're not going to lead the way on that. And I don't. Sony really, as odd as it sounds, Sony should be the company that can. They have the dedicated followers, and they have a history of making just like their VR glasses. They have a history of making good hardware that people want to use. The problem with Sony, though, is I think the way their company is structured is that they go, okay, we want you, this team over here, you're going to make us a new camera for the PlayStation 3, and you're going to be able to look at cards on the ground, and it's going to show stuff on the screen. And the team's like, yes, sir, we're going to make it. And they make it, and then they release it, and then you're like, is there going to be more for that? And then they're like, oh, we let that team go. Yeah, they don't work for us anymore. Like, and you're just like, I don't understand. Like, they don't stick to their hardware, but maybe they're learning it with VR. I mean, Ken Kutaragi's not with Sony anymore. I don't know, but they're the way, because they were a consumer electronics company, and they're just used to building products that way. They're just used to building something that's a one-time shot. Like, here's our e-reader. Okay, you guys are all fired. Go find your jobs. And
what about this yet? They got the new banana controller or whatever that is. they have these patents, and they're like, oh, you can use a piece of fruit, it's
maybe it's a thing. Yeah.
It's like that line in a Jurassic Park where Malcolm, whatever, Jeff Goldblum's like, you spent so much time, wondering and thinking whether or not you could. You never stop to think whether or not you should. About like what you create space, and it's like I did a post. I'm like, yeah, this is what happens when you're so far ahead in the console war. You're just like, well, I don't know. We'll just make banana controllers, but yeah, exactly. Which kind of looks like the old Boomerang controller. Remember that thing?
Yes, right. But they have the ability. I think they could, if they had come out with a Kinect type of device, people would have embraced it like crazy. They would have been like, I mean, they had their motion. They still do with 3D. What do they call that? Move. But Move is flawed, and they should fix it because
they just integrated it into the VR unit, and I mean, they are coming out with a new VR headset. That is gonna be like one cord, and that's one of the main reasons I don't use my VR right now, is because it's like, well, it doesn't run. I can't use it doesn't run 4K. I have to unplug it. It's just such a freaking hassle. Right. If I can't just like leave it there. I got to rearrange my.
It's all or nothing, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, the Oculus Rift, and the Rift 2 or whatever has, kind of set the bar for how you can make this happen. And I think there'll be more room, because I do think, honestly, everybody that I've allowed to play the VR headset has thought it was really cool.
Oh yeah, it is. It's also hard to share with people too, isn't it? Like, you get something and then they're like, well, I don't know how it is with I have a PlayStation when I played it once. But I have Oculus, the new one, Quest 2. And it's like, when you start that one, it's always like, well, first draw out your play area and tell us where the floor is. And so, like, you could be in the middle of a bowling game or something, and you're like, okay, here's your turn. You take it off, you give it to them. They're like, it's telling me I've got like draw out the room or something.
Yeah, because you're 6'7" or whatever. Yeah, you got Anderson over there, and it's
got to get two of them or something.
Yeah, it's not quite there yet, but for a single player experience, that's one thing. I mean, thinking about games, and I don't really know. You've been playing games longer than I have, so I think it's probably the same with movies after a while, right? It's like you see enough movies, and you're kind of just. They're telling the same stories over and over in a different way with different characters, but some are going to resonate with you and some aren't. And there's still value in that. Mm-hmm. There's going to be the guys that I know a guy, there's a guy that's one of my customers, and he's like, oh yeah, I love video games. Like, oh yeah, what game do you play? He's like, all I play is Call of Duty Zombies. That's it. I'm like, and you're to me, you're not a gamer. You're a Call of Duty player. And it's like there's like those guys that only play World of Warcraft. Yeah. Those are people that only play
They're gamers, but they're just not obsessed with it.
I know. I mean, but in my mind. Move is weak like Dan James. What is that? Is Dan James the guy that you know?
Yeah. It's
Okay. See, man, he's referencing old school stuff I almost forgot about.
got a good memory.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think it's interesting in where we're at right now, in that it's like we're almost to the point where, I don't know if you agree with this or not. We're almost to the point where it feels like we're oversaturated in the sense of there's so much stuff, and which is interesting because there's really only 3 consoles. You got your Nintendo, your Xbox, and your Sony, right? There's been periods of time where there were way more consoles available.
For sure.
As you know, you have a lot of them.
And PC, we have PC.
Right, we have PC too. But so now we have the platforms have shrunk, but the audience has expanded, and mobile has been a big part of that. So do you think we're in danger of reaching any point like we did in the 80s with a similar sort of crash, or do you think people are gonna fall out of favor with it? Because I personally feel like gaming's never been as popular as it is right now. Like,
for sure,
everybody plays games.
But I think that like mobile gaming, it didn't live up to what people were sort of expecting it to be. It didn't turn into the next, like the future of gaming isn't on people's phones.
But they're still making games. Like, I just saw. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Like $1 or whatever.
I was watching this thing, like the creator of Final Fantasy, Sakaguchi or whatever his name is, like talking about his new RPG. It's like, oh, it's all this stuff. I'm like, sweet. Like he hasn't made. No, I love Final Fantasy. It was like only for mobile. I'm like, why? Like, I don't. Nobody's playing an epic RPG on their phone. I like the only game I play on there is chess and Clash of Clans. That's it. But it's like the Japanese audience must be way different. They must.
Well, it's worldwide, right? So you have multiple billions of people with mobile, and you got this ready-made audience, and they're willing to pay for loot drops and things, and it's sort of not controlled too much by a master company, so you can get away with a lot of stuff. But I don't talk about the worst gaming experience is just on your phone. It's just, even with the big screen, there's no controllers. You got to rub your finger on the glass and hope it's somewhat accurate. And I got giant hands, so my thumb takes up half the screen anyway. And I'm like, I don't even know what I'm doing. And it's not comfortable to hold for too long. It's not. We all have games on our phones, but I think most of the time we're playing some simple puzzle games or something like Threes or whatever, just because. Just when you're taking a poop or something. Yeah, something real simple. I mean, that's why Angry Birds took off. Like that was the first real game that was gigantic, and it was funny because their game was free or $1, right? Yeah. And then you still had like traditional gaming companies trying to figure out this market, and they're like Square. They would be like, "Here's our game, and it's $15 on mobile," and people were like, "I'm not paying that." A mobile game. That's crazy. I'll give you $1. I'll play a game for $1. And that's kind of what happened to it. So I don't think mobile is like tablets have kind of. Do people still buy tablets? I think people bought tablets like thinking they were great, and then they're just like, well, now I have one and I don't turn it on. So
sure. Unless you're using it for work or something. But
no, but to your point, I think gaming is never been more popular. It's more socially accepted, but I do think that you do run the risk of that Atari 2600 type of thing where you have all the games you need, and people are pretty happy, like your Call of Duty guy, like your World of Warcraft guy, and they stop buying games because they don't. I mean, how many games do you have on Steam that you've never played?
Oh, tons. Many. And now they're like giving them away. If you have the Epic, you can download the Epic thing for free and get like some really good stuff. I'm like, I need to live like John. I was just talking to him. He's like, I need to live 3 lifetimes to be able to play these games.
Exactly right. And so like at some point you're like, if the games don't evolve in the way I was talking about, then people won't necessarily buy them because they already have a bunch they haven't played yet that they need to get through. And I think everybody has beloved franchises. The Madden guys are still going to buy Madden every year. The NBA guys are going to buy NBA, but or maybe they'll skip a year here or there or whatever. Sure. But I don't know if that's enough to sustain an industry, right? Yeah. Like I think they need people like that buy the 5, 6, 7 games for their game consoles because that's how they make their money. And because the game systems themselves are usually they take a loss, and they make it up on software sales. And if everybody only buys one game or 1 or 2 games, it's bad for that industry. And so now they do the thing where you pay the subscription fee, you can play as many games as you want, et cetera. But that splitting all that money up between all those games and those game companies means that they're not going to make that kind of Guitar Hero money.
Sure.
Where they're getting like $100 million a month or whatever from when they had those games come out. So if you can come up with that Guitar Hero, if you can come up with Rock Band, and you do it right, you'll make a ton of money. That's hard though.
Yeah, it's interesting times we live in. I mean, as you know, I won't get into this because we'll go another hour. But gaming, the fact that you literally can't get a PS5 right now, pretty much.
Right.
That's one of the lucky.
Got to be on a waiting list somewhere.
Yeah. Waiting list, right? Your wife has to get you one or something. And like now I'm sitting here. I think they have an okay gaming PC, but I want to upgrade my graphics card. I can't get that. And
sure.
I can't buy anything. So I think there's
really expensive. Yeah.
Yeah. There's huge. There's a huge demand for it. There's still a huge market for it. And I think people have been saying probably since the PS3 days that I remember when PS4 and Xbox One came on the scene, they were saying like, this is it. Like we're not doing consoles anymore. And the PS4 sold like almost like 90 million, 100 million units. It's like,
yeah.
Like it's one of the top selling consoles of all time. And that PS5 is on track to doing that as well. So people are going to stick around for it. I think what's interesting to me is like, who has the ultimate strategy in terms of being profitable? Like Nintendo's sort of like, they seem to know how to make profit. They make cheap stuff. They stick with their ideas. Slow and steady wins the race. But
their mobile game, that thing was a huge phenomenon for a little while. That Pikachu, Pokemon thing on.
Oh yeah. Well, actually, the guys that rent from me, they still play that stuff.
Yeah, I never played it, but it was a huge game.
Yeah, still a big deal.
Kids on the sidewalk, just like standing there doing something on their phones.
Yeah.
Sorry.
There would be people. There's a small like man-made lake nearby, and people would like go down there. There's like 40 people, and they're all like walking around and just their head down. Like, is this what we've come to? Is this what we've come to as a society?
Right.
We're just
yeah. So crazy.
Well, I know it's getting late over there, so I'll let you go. I just want to ask. I'm going to throw out a couple audience questions.
I took a nap today. I'm good.
Okay, cool. Let's ask this one. So this is my wife. She wrote. And I'll try to paraphrase it. What would you say? Would you say what excited you with video games as a child still does today in the same way? And so I guess think back upon.
Is that really her maiden name? Bonanza or something?
Bonanza? No.
Okay.
Hannah Bananas.
Never know. Well, what do you think?
Yeah. Well, for me, I think it's been. I think games have grown up with me, and like there was a time when I was turning 10, 11, 12, that's when Mortal Kombat kind of came on the scene, and that was like the first mature game. But you look back now, and it's like pretty silly. But we had never really seen anything like that, and so games were age appropriate in the sense of they were made for kids, as you said. It was like Disney for the most part, and everybody grew up with Nintendo. But as we got into the PlayStation era, and the fact that games evolved with me has kept me hooked, because I think if we didn't have Metal Gear Solid, for me personally, if we didn't have the Metal Gear Solid and the Final Fantasy 7s in the PlayStation 1 era, I probably would have taken a step away from it. I may have come back eventually, but if my only option was to play Ocarina of Time, I would have played it, but it wouldn't have been like, it would have still been like, well, this is a kid's game. And it's like, Metal Gear and Final Fantasy 7 were like mature games, and you're like, whoa, games can do this. They can have this kind of dialogue. They can, Metal Gear. Like, remember how bad the voice acting was in video games? Like,
Resident
Evil. Oh yeah, all those. It was so bad. And then Metal Gear Solid was like, okay, even though they were talking about a bunch of nonsense, like they sounded like real voice actors, and you're like, whoa. You have dialogue, and then with the Final Fantasy 7, they had the full motion.
They had none of that before. It was all,
yeah. So that
or the words coming out of the screen, like, oh my god,
exactly. So I think that. So to answer the question, it still does, but in the sense that like I still love experiencing two things about games. I love games that are a challenge, like there's the gameplay aspect of it where it's like overcoming something, and it's something that's just literally fun to play. But then there's the other aspects of it where it's like, I'm into this because I'm into this world or this character. And I think those things are the same for when I was a kid and I played Final Fantasy 1. even now the more elaborate RPGs where you can do so much. Like it's still the same like love for it. It's just now it still speaks to me as an adult because it's grown up with me. Does that make sense?
I agree. I think when you find a great game that you really enjoy, it's an absolute joy. And it takes me back to when I was a kid where I would sink insane amount of hours into a game. At the same time, there is a lot of disappointment in this hobby. There are a lot of things that you are excited for, and when you get it, you're like, this is awful. There's like not a lot of apology for that. It's not going to necessarily get better. Sometimes they patch it. Bethesda manages to do some stuff where their games don't suck. But a lot of games do, and some games just come out and they're just totally broken. And some experiences are bad. You bet on a console and it doesn't live up to your expectations of what you thought it was going to be. And there's less of that now, but there was a lot of it back in the day. There was a lot of different consoles that Dreamcast, for instance, was a really fun, great console, had a lot of great games on it. But Sega was just like, we just can't compete against Sony. I mean, Ken Kutaragi was coming out making stuff up. He's like, ours is going to make you so you can go through time and you could go anywhere in the world.
Saddam Hussein was programming missiles with it.
Right.
You know?
There's a portal that'll open. You can just walk through. You can come to Japan and eat dinner at my house. Right. And so, Sega was like, well, we gotta end this. And it was unfortunate because I think maybe if they had stuck it out, they would have done a little bit better because the PlayStation 2 had a memory leak problem in it that made all the graphics kind of muddy. It was still a very successful system, but the Dreamcast wasn't that underpowered that it would have suffered because it didn't have that problem. Yeah. But anyway, that's what happens. And if you were that guy that bought that, you're like, well, I got 3 years out of this, and now I got to buy something else. And so there's a lot of disappointment in gaming in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of good to it as well. And I just think that it's all about fun. And if you're having fun, that's what it's all for. If you're not having fun, you shouldn't be doing it. You should be doing something else, but you should be able to sit down with your game system and have a really good time. I don't understand people that play games just to get pissed off because there's a lot of those people too. They're just like, I can't believe, and they just walk out of the room.
I may have been known to do that. That's what it was. It's the stubborn factor, dude. It's like those games that are good, like Hades, and it's just like, but it's meant to torture you, just like Hades. And so you're just like, I'm not walking away until I beat this.
It's so angry, people are mad.
Oh, dude.
I guess that's their way of having fun, but I can't be that.
I bought this really nice TV that's over here. It's like an OLED TV, and I've had a few moments where I have gone through the progress in my head of me chucking my controller through the TV, and I'd be like, and I have to tell myself, no, you would really regret that,
right?
So I just I'm just, all the haptics are going crazy. I'm squeezing my controller,
right? So frustrating.
But well, that's a good answer. I do want to transition that into this, and he kind of means this as a joke, but I do want to know this. Just hang in. Has Kevin answered what is the greatest game of all time and why is it Knack 2? But a two-parter. Like, what's the last game that really did make you feel like? What was the last game you really loved? And what is your favorite game of all time? Or give me one of them. It doesn't have to be
off the top of my head. That's going to be hard.
Or name a couple. But like those games that. It doesn't matter if it's still good today. It could be Joust for what matters. It just what. Your top, lists.
Star Control 2 was really great. It had a great narrative. It had a great, interesting story behind it. It had good gameplay, except for maybe some of the mining operations that you had to do, kind of like Mass Effect. Great storyline, all that kind of stuff. It's very similar in a way because in Star Control 2, you had to go out and find these other races that you never met before out in space and form an army to defeat a great evil. But what was interesting about that story was that the great evil was actually fighting another great evil, and there was like this war going on between them that you didn't know about right away, and you were kind of stuck in the middle of it. It was a great story. It was a great game. So that game always just sort of sticks out as being one of my favorite games. But it's certainly not like a technological marvel or anything. It is out there now. I think it's called the Urquan Masters. They got most of the rights to it. And I think they made a new one or something, but I haven't played it.
Okay. And then recently, like what's like the last game you can think of that you were not utterly disappointed with?
I mean, I'm playing A Plague Tale right now, and that's pretty impressive, graphically and storyline wise. And we all know that Kevin is not good at sneaking games.
It's true.
And this is basically just a stealth game, and I'm actually progressing in it really well. So I'm really enjoying that game. It's rated really well, but it's not for everybody. I mean, you're basically helping a kid survive, in a plague-ridden world and everything. And it's one of those art. I think it's like an art piece. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's a lot of fun, and I'm kind of working through that right now. So I mean, in recent, that's right off the top of my head. Yeah,
that's cool. I saw actually I have a buddy who told me about that game, and I don't have the Xbox Game Pass right now, but I think it's still on there. So eventually when I
it makes for PC as well.
Yes, yeah,
it's good looking. I mean, if you got graphic power, it there's even like a mode you can take photos and things.
Oh, nice, cool. Well, awesome, dude. Thanks so much for coming on here, spending 2 hours of your life.
Did you answer the question of what's your favorite game? What is your?
Oh, you want me to answer it? I'll answer it. Yeah. Well, so my favorite game of all time is a boring one because it's probably a lot of people's, but it's probably still Final Fantasy VII. And I think the reason why, I mean, there's arguably even better Final Fantasy games in terms, like people say, oh, Final Fantasy VI is the best and Final Fantasy VII. But for me, it was the turning point. I think I talked about it already, where it was like, okay, games have grown up, and I wanted that game. I had no money, even though I had a PlayStation. I wanted that game so badly as a kid, and when I got it, and I loved it. It was like everything that I wanted in the game, and put so much time into it. And I replayed it, and I played. I don't know. I probably put more time in that game than any other game. So to have such high expectations for it, and for it to totally live up to it in my mind, and then when the remake came out, which I know is not the full game, sure. I played it. That was actually like the first stream I did for Coin A Geek was that, cool. And I was playing it, and I was like, dude, like it's something. It's weird. I don't know if you're anything nostalgic at all, but playing it, I was just like, this just takes me back. It was like. Yeah, it was like, I don't know, watching somebody remake Star Wars or something. You're like, whoa, and like doing it right and hitting all the right notes, and you're just like, this is so good. So that has to be my
our future deepfake Star Wars sequel.
Yeah, exactly. Harrison Ford, episode 10 or whatever. He's 20 years old. The other question about most recently, See, it's hard because I think of games, when I think of like greatest games, I think of stuff that impact, like story-wise, that impacted me. But sorry, I'm really sorry about this. I've been playing a lot of games recently, and I actually think Demon Souls, the remake for Demon Souls on PS5, is really good, and probably. I have to say that for now, that's like the most recent, like amazing game that I played, because I'm not a Souls fan. I didn't like Dark Souls. I played Bloodborne a little bit, but to me, it's like these games are clunky. They're kind of ugly. They don't run very well. They take forever to load. Right. So when you had the game come out and it's like, well, this game is gorgeous. It's probably the best looking PS5 game right now, in my opinion. And also it gets away with all the loading times and everything. And I actually could appreciate it and be like, this game has really good level design. It's hard and it can be frustrating, but it's never like cheap. Like there's a difference between being hard and being like, this game's just broken, as you would say. And it's like the computer's just knows exactly what input I'm putting in. It's like, that's what happens with fighting games, is like, it's literally matching my input. It's like you press kick, so I press, jump kick or something. And it's like, how am I supposed to ever beat this thing? Except pure luck. But in the Souls games, it was like a puzzle. It's like, well, you can eventually learn the strategies. You can eventually learn how the characters come out. And when you see yourself get better, it's like, I don't know, there's something super satisfying about getting past the boss, even if you spend 2 hours on it, because you're like, oh, I finally figured out the pattern and I did it. Yeah. So that changed my mind about the Souls games in general. So now I'm going back and I'm playing other Souls games and with a new appreciation. So I would have to say that one is probably it so far, most recently for me.
Awesome. Great.
Yeah. Well, cool, man. So let's plug your stuff one more time. Where can people listen to you? Talk a little bit. I mean, you talked about Oblast, but if somebody wants to go listen to any of our past episodes or listen to Oblast, where can they find you?
I mean, the easiest thing to do is just look for in your whatever you're listening to podcasting with, like so it's iTunes, Spotify, etc. Just do a search for Oblast, which is exactly how it sounds, letter O, blast, and you'll probably find it. I mean, it is the name of how they determine what counties are or something in Russia, but I don't know if anybody, some county auditor in Russia, is going to make a podcast about it. So it's probably just us, and you'll find the show on there. We're also, we have a page on Facebook if you want to keep up with some notes on when things are coming and that sort of stuff. There's a Oblast on there you can search for, and but yeah, we're on every aggregator that there is because the show's been around forever, so look for that. Video Game News Radio is still out there if you want to listen to it. It like I said, we haven't done shows since we did a Midwest Wasteland when the pandemic started just to get everybody's input on it. But we haven't done any like gaming shows in quite a while. But if you want the history, etc., there's a lot of shows on the feed, and you can find that. You can go to videogamenews.com, and it'll take you to our Facebook page.
So crazy! You still have that domain name, so that's good.
Sure. Nobody's offered me $1 million for it. It's all.
Well, dude, thanks so much, man. I know we caught up a little bit the other day, but it's fun talking video games with you as always, and appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us. And maybe someday in the future we'll catch up again, maybe however long from now, and talk about whatever crazy, if they come out with some new VR or some new experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can find all my stuff at the garage sale that my girlfriend put out with everything like $1. That probably costs thousands of dollars or something. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Follow Kevin on Facebook if you want to see the latest crazy chip he's eating, from Thailand.
All the kinds of cats. Right. Thanks.
Appreciate you, man. Have a great night.
Thanks.
Yeah. Ending broadcast.